Welcome to another episode of the Reboot Chronicles, a no-holds-barred forum with global leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, and CEOs about how organizations stay focused on growth and innovation in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean Tobias, coming to you live from Reviv's North American headquarters in Chicago, and we would like to thank you for joining us from around the globe today. I'd like to welcome a good friend, colleague, and digital thought leader, Atif Rafiq, who I've known as an executive at Amazon, at McDonald's, Volvo, and now is one of the presidents at MGM Resorts International. Those of you that don't know, it's about a $14 billion Fortune 300 company, and they have about 28 mega destinations, not just in Vegas, folks, and about 80,000 employees. We'll talk about that in a second, but I thought we'd start out, maybe take a quick look at the global hospitality industry, and no surprise to many of you, it has been, in my opinion, devastated in 2020. And the duration of the correction seems a bit uncertain to me anyway. So we're going to dig into that. After all, it took, I think, about 3 years for the airlines to recover and come back after 9/11. And that was just in the US. It wasn't a global phenomenon. So I think basically it seems like with international traveling still kind of barely happening, there's not a lot of that movement going on right now. Some countries are experiencing the lowest occupancy levels in decades. There's a local systemic impact to this as well, which I'm most troubled about, because the travel ecosystem is critical to a lot of these local economies and governments that feed off this business travel, the conventions, the tourism. For instance, Mexico, a place I spent a lot of time in, it's probably the most vulnerable of the countries. About 15% of its GDP comes from tourism. The US, not so much, roughly it's 8.6% of our GDP, but it's about 17 million jobs, at least it was. In a new study, a little bit more data here, conducted by the American Hotel Lodging Associations, the owners said that 90% of them have laid off employees, 37% brought back about half of their full-time employees, just about half, as it's kind of starting to pick up a little bit. And 36% say they're unable to bring back their laid-off workers at this point. So I think the industry, as an optimist, is going to rebound slowly. The question is, when is that going to happen, and who's going to survive? Of that same survey, which is about 600 hotel owners, so probably smaller ones, they say about half of them are saying that they're in danger of losing their property to foreclosure. So that's pretty serious. So if there was ever a sector that needed a reboot, I think this is it. And Atif, knowing you as I do, in your track record of rebooting McDonald's and Volvo into the digital realities, I think it's a good thing you're there. Welcome, by the way.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate it. It's always nice to chat with you, and I'm happy to join this conversation.
Yeah, a long time. I wish I was there in Vegas with you. Before we dig into how you have been rebooting MGM, because I've been watching some of the cool stuff you've been doing, maybe just kick off for the listeners and the viewers can just get a quick overview of the company. It's much bigger than Vegas, and then also, what is your commercial and growth role about in the company? That would be helpful.
Yeah, so MGM Resorts, as you mentioned, Dean, is a Fortune 300 company, and that scale really comes from the fact that a resort property is really like a small city, because it's a self-contained unit which has everything from obviously a place to stay, places to meet, entertainment options, and in many cases a number of fine dining outlets. So you can easily spend 2 or 3 days without leaving a resort. That's kind of the intention, is to kind of cover all the bases. So if you look at a property like Bellagio, which I'm currently working out of,
Love that place.
The Bellagio is, kind of a signature destination in Las Vegas. Of course, it's $1 billion entity in and of itself. And then so when you start adding, a number of them, both in Las Vegas, but also across the US and globally, you get to be a company of a very high scale. So some things people don't know about MGM Resorts would be, for example, that it's the third largest provider of live entertainment. So there's A-list artists, there's, shows like Cirque du Soleil are obviously very prolific here. Pre-COVID, it's the largest non-chain kind of food business in America in terms of operating restaurants, food and beverage outlets. There's just so much choice for dining and lounges and things of that nature. And so when you put that together with very significantly sized resorts, Bellagio has about 3,000 rooms, so it's pretty massive. And then the convention space, you get something that's very, very unique as a destination in the world. Now, in terms of what I do for a living, if you want me to get into that a bit, I'm in a newly created role. I mean, it's not new anymore because I've been here, a year and a half, but it is new in the sense that we were looking to go in a different direction as a company, preparing ourselves for the next wave of, what our ambition is.
Right.
So what I mean by that, Dean, is that I'm responsible for many of the corporate functions, everything from marketing and sales and revenue to tech, IT, digital, loyalty programs. So it's really bringing together the full of business model with the customer experience in a single remit to make changes faster, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, working with you at McDonald's and watching you at Volvo, it's kind of you've got that muscle memory, and bringing it to the hospitality industry, which has been slow to adopt a lot of digital stuff, is just going to be, well, it's been fun to watch. We'll dig into a couple of those. I actually have a couple of questions that were sent in advance. There's so many people that want to travel and they want to get the heck out of their house and get away from everything, and they would love to sit by your pool and hang out in a cabana or just walk around Vegas and have some fun, but many are reluctant still to travel, as we know, as I covered in the opening. But maybe give us a sense of what is it like there on the Strip? What's going on in Vegas right now?
Well, I guess the first thing this year is that while we were closed for 2 months, we were very active and we were preparing the resort for, to be a safe space. And so we did everything from investing in the PPE. So you'll find hand washing stations, all over the resort lobby space, for example, putting up plexiglass, not only the PPE, but also modifying many of our operations to be contactless. So everything from the check-in is mobile. You can even print keys on your own without needing intervention from another person. You don't queue up at a restaurant. You sign up in a digital queue, so you get a text when it's your turn to be seated. The menus are driven off QR codes. In the restaurants. In your room, there's no paper really, so your room service menu is also driven off a QR code, and that's just really the start of it. So really using technology to make things contactless, and then obviously putting in important protocols with our employees so that we're doing testing. All employees were wearing masks from day one, and now customers as well. So first and foremost, we put the emphasis on safety, and we kind of have this safety platform. When we reopened in June, we found enough of a crowd willing to want to come back, not the same levels as before. Previously Vegas is sort of works on 90% occupancy on average. It can go up and down depending upon the time of year, but about 90%.
Right.
And what we've seen is roughly about 40%. So
it's better than most areas, actually. It's not bad.
Yeah, so a little quieter on the weekday and then a little busier on the weekend. But in any case, we do have a self-imposed occupancy cap of about 50 to 60%. That's where we're comfortable. We won't go beyond that, in the current climate, because we want to make sure we do the right thing.
I mean, it seems like, without digging into the finances, this isn't CNBC, but you guys can weather the storm. I'm concerned about some of the smaller groups that may not have that ability to kind of dig into the deep pockets or hold it at 50%. And are you finding is there a local, like in many cities around the world, there's a local push to keep people in business, keep them alive, but it's mostly focused on local merchants. People aren't worried about Walmart. But what's it like in Vegas? Is there some, for instance, they put together a 7-point safety plan. You put that on steroids, obviously, and came up with much broader ideas than the government would, I guess. But what's the overall population doing there? Are they helping out?
It is a balanced conversation with the governor of the state, with the health officials as well, trying to navigate the crisis and make some good calls. The tension that everyone has is economics, where in Las Vegas, for example, MGM Resorts, if I'm not mistaken, is, well, it's definitely the largest employer in the state of Nevada, number one. And second, I think, probably contributes maybe even a quarter of the GDP of the state. So we're a significant influencer on, the household economics of people who live here, so to speak. And so we take that into account. We want to keep people working and employed and earning income so they can support their families. But at the same time, what takes precedent is sort of the health climate and being smart about that with the protocols, occupancy restrictions, and other requirements. So we think the officials here have done a great job, and we've been working closely with them to always make the right decisions.
Of course, I would always bring my dad to Vegas. We'd get a couple suites at the Bellagio and gamble all night, and his game was craps, so that's all I really ever got to play. But it just seems, listening to you speak, it's like you probably have the hardest thing to control. Like all these games, like craps and roulette, and anything with chip related and cards, it's all touching everything, all the chips and the cards and the dice. And have you cleaned it up so much where it's not a fun experience? Because it is about the the intoxicating environment, not necessarily drinking, just being in that environment and getting the energy and the winning and losing and all that stuff. Is that magic able to transform into this touchless mess we're in?
Well, I think everything's relative, Dean. I mean, you raise a good point around the vibe. I mean, any place where you go for leisure or fun, you're looking for a vibe. And,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be quite accurate to say it's the same vibe as it was 5 months ago. It's not, but it is still a good vibe as I walk around the place. And relative to people's other options, which are kind of de minimis, I mean, there's not a lot of places that have been able to open successfully and create some stability in their opening. And then, of course, there's the option of just sort of being at home all continuously. Relative to that, it's a relief for people when they can actually have a change of scenery. And so, from that perspective, I think it's relative. Plexiglass at a table game, not exactly what people were thinking a year ago, probably unimaginable, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But relative to the times we're in, I think people get it.
So your background is interesting. It's similar to mine, being that you've run both startups and major corporation components, and that brings together an interesting sweet spot of growth and innovation. So let's switch to how you're managing growth and innovation. Going from fast food to fast cars, and now the hospitality industry, which is probably a little different. But when you look at growth and innovation, well, actually, rather than just generally talking about it, maybe talk about some of the new things that you've kind of invented for people to either get back to the resort, or I think you launched something today that was, I won't steal your thunder, that was really an interesting work from home angle that no one saw coming.
Yeah, Dean. So today we did launch Viva LA Office, which is essentially.
I love that. Love that name.
Very apropos for Las Vegas, and we have good marketing people, so kudos to them. But it makes it very easy for you to be productive and enjoy leisure time in Vegas. So you can imagine someone coming for 5 days, which is the work week, arriving and leaving as they please. So arrive as early as 8 a.m., leave as late as 6 p.m., don't worry about it. Having an executive assistant, which is kind of like the human touch of a concierge to book things, because there are a number of inclusions that we have, like a cabana or a poolside massage. We could add on things like, if you wanted to rent something, an outdoor adventure, we could take care of that. But imagine having a comfortable, room with great Wi-Fi and a great desk, a food and beverage credit every day, so you could have, for example, feed your coffee habit, and then have,
and other habits, yes.
And then a couple perks, to kind of break up the monotony of the workday. And people will. We think people will be a little jealous that you're so productive and you're in a place where you can actually get some fresh air and change of scenery. So that's an example of a new customer program. It didn't exist 6 weeks ago. The team went from idea to launch in in about 6 weeks. And it's an example of the kinds of things I expect, from our company and from others, is we've got to be in the business of trying things and seeing if we tap into some new emerging need that can help grow our company, because, we're definitely going to need those new ideas to produce, new ways, new business.
So Viva La Office, it's only a few days old, but do you think it's going to attract a lot of local people too? Just want to get out of their house, the ones that are working, and actually come to one of your properties and work out of the room and enjoy a little fun time? Or you're obviously your target market is more the global audience. What do you think the mix is going to be there?
Well, right now there are 5 million Californians, all within a driving distance, who are essentially work in offices. They do corporate work, but they're not able to work from their offices. And so they are potentially, really, really in the sweet spot of who we're targeting.
Yep.
Nationally, there are about 20 to 30 million people in this situation. And we've also, related to this, but separate, come up with a way to combine semi-private travel through a partnership with a company called Jet Suite, which operates in certain markets. And you kind of skip the TSA line. It's a shared jet, but it's pretty limited occupancy,
right.
And it's more luxurious. And that's also a way for us to grow business and address a customer need. So we basically are thinking about end-to-end travel as a way to create more comfort with travel to a destination resort like ours.
So if I took that from, let's say, San Jose Airport, what am I looking at, price tag wise, roughly?
Yeah, so it's they fly from Oakland, so that'd be pretty convenient. And right now, we're basically saying for $100 each way, if you give us some advance notice, you can have luxury travel that arguably is more controlled environment, potentially more safe, make you feel better about the visit. $100 each way, depending upon some advance notice.
That is like dirt cheap. So you're subsidizing it, which is smart, sounds like.
Yeah, actually, our real aim is to kind of simplify and make it convenient. That's sort of my shtick,
right.
Because we often talk about technology in and of itself, but in the end, whether it's a business model change like the one we're talking about here, or technology, in the end, you're trying to simplify choice for the customer and make it easy to say, okay, you've met my need, sign me up, and then they don't have to worry about any of the hassle.
Yeah, I love that. If I was to, could you pick me up in Denver or Chicago? A couple places I hang out in.
Well, we're working
please.
We're working with this provider to figure out if there are other routes. So if there are, another 100 people like you, which I'm sure they are, maybe we could come up with that.
Oh, they're here. I'll find them for you. No. So that's fascinating. I've seen how when you came into McDonald's, the role was like not a chief innovation officer. I talk about this a lot at Kellogg. Your ears must burn occasionally, because rather than chief innovation officer, it was like, no, we need a chief digital officer, and they will innovate what we are missing. So you brought this whole new pedigree and this set of new products and services that really transform their experience, and not so much the food, but everything else around that. So how are you bringing your management style, your way, kind of agile, fast, quick, smart, try it, maybe it doesn't work? How do you bring that into, a Fortune 300, for instance, that's in a totally different industry? What's that been like?
It is an art as much as it is a science thing, so you sort of learn as you go along. And I'm fortunate enough, this is my third rodeo with an incumbent, if you will, working and partnering with the CEO, which I did, of course, at McDonald's, because you know him as well, and trying to have a very specific ambition for the customer and what we want to be when we grow up, and then kind of working backwards, Amazon style, to say, what are the changes necessary to get there. So first, it's about seeing something together as a vision of what we could stand for in the world, how we can improve our relevance, and then taking the steps to mobilize the company against that takes often very significant change. But if you can explain the why and make it interesting and meaningful for the top team to want to chase that, then that's the first starting point. And I think the other thing I've learned as I've gone along, because you want to kind of keep evolving your toolkit. From my perspective, the one really powerful way to change a company is to role model, how to think about things, and literally use every single meeting to kind of push the thinking, to ask the right questions, and kind of have people come to a common direction that they understand, not just one that they're being told to go execute on.
Yeah, that makes sense. The what I've noticed in interviewing CEOs on the program in 2020, at least, is many of them have had to do what your CEO has done, which is step down many layers of management and do triage. You guys have done triage. You had the luxury or penalty of being non-essential, so you had to shut down. So it probably gave you some buffer time just to order plexiglass, or other places like Walgreens couldn't. So what I've noticed is a couple things is like management has or they're reevaluating their business. They're looking more to people like you and saying, how can you help us? How can you make this better? And before there was more reluctance to that. There was definitely more reluctance to digital. So, as Ann Winblad said in the program last week, it's like, we had a digital final exam in 2020 and everybody's late and not necessarily getting the right answer. So are you finding it easier, more impactful, or quite frankly, more critical for the things that you represent now, bringing into MGM than maybe it was pre-pandemic?
I think that, people sort of got it at some level, some theoretical level, before the pandemic, but now it's obviously a clear necessity. I mean, you can get shut down if you operate a physical business and you have too much of a queue or a line, right? You can make customers very frustrated, expectations-wise, if they think they're going to get to the pool and jump right in, and then it's not safe because there are already people who got there. And so streamlining things and organizing the customer experience in a way where people have a lot more control. There's self-service. Technology is kind of the only way to do it, whether it's getting your food or getting in line for something, or quite frankly, just showing up and getting direct to the room, which you can do now with us. So I think Ann's comment was spot on. It was sort of like the necessity is the mother of invention. And so that, I think, is irreversible. That's a one-way door. And the more that we can do to streamline, I think, our company, certainly everyone in hospitality, I think, will be all in on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a major transformational stuff. I mean, Vegas didn't invent the buffet, but they perfected the buffet, and those are all gone. Just the whole idea of ordering digitally to some of their demographics is a bit foreign, especially the older baby boomers. They're like, "What? I got to use my phone? What's a QR code?" So it's fun to see you kind of pivoting through that. Let's switch, since we talked about Silicon Valley a little bit. Both you and I have had a long track record of what I call dancing with startups, the program I help companies with. But it's so having run both big companies and small, you've got a very different perspective on that. So I'm interested in what types of, when you're looking at innovation, what things are you going to build on your own, what things are you going to acquire and buy, and what things are you going to borrow? In other words, partnering with, which I think is a big category for you, bringing in other companies that can help you either accelerate or just use their inventions so you can, actually adopt. And I was doing a little research of things you've done, companies like Pure Room and Portier and other technology companies. So I know our audience loves to hear how these big companies can bring together all types of disparate technologies out there that don't, and especially when you're in hospitality, because you're not really a tech company, whereas other companies might invent it themselves. My guess is you focus more on partnering.
Well, one of the things that I do, and it could be more specific to me, having, kind of grown up in Silicon Valley, is I do talent infusion with the very top engineers and developers who are in my network, and I bring them in because I believe that at some level you have to control your own destiny, and you don't want to be vendor-led or sort of led by somebody else. In the end, you own what the product is, what the customer experience is, and if you don't understand that in software development as much as you do in terms of hospitality training, then you have a disadvantage.
Right.
But other companies are a part of the formula for sure, Dean. So I'm a big believer in co-creation at the same time. So imagine a situation where you could have 10 great technologists inside your company who could work at Google or Amazon, and yet they are working on the other side of the table with companies of that like. What can they come up with together? And
exactly. Right.
That I think is super powerful. So, in the McDonald's days, we did that. We were the first company in QSR to do Apple Pay, and we had the ability to pull that off, with 4 or 5 weeks notice and be part of the keynote, which our CEO attended. We worked with Google and their version of sort of face pay. They didn't launch it, but we were we created 5 restaurants where we could do skunkworks projects. Yep. And with their product managers, our product managers made it work. They couldn't go to market with it, but there was a lot of learnings with it. And similarly with Google X at the time, there was a project to use drones to do delivery. So we were literally planning that at a certain Air Force base together with Google, where you could get a McDonald's delivery on the campus of the Air Force Base. Pretty interesting.
Sounds like Moffett Field to me. And you were one of the first ones that opened up a actually downtown San Francisco office, I think. I didn't see anyone do that in that sector.
Yeah, and that was the comfort signal for talent to kind of join us, that we're serious and that we'd support them. And so obviously that's an important ingredient to improve sort of the technology IQ and the innovation velocity in the company. And at Volvo, we went further and we had a 250-person Mountain View office working on, of course, autonomous cars, computer vision, LiDAR technology. And they have a huge partnership with Google where they essentially replaced the proprietary development of the infotainment unit. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's bought cars, in the previous 20 years knows that you spend, thousands of dollars on a center console of infotainment that you don't use because your phone is better at. And instead, they went in the direction of using a native version of Android so that the car is actually a device. And so, that's really hard to execute unless you have, the right talent in proximity with those companies. And so I think that is also right. A powerful ingredient.
So that's a good pivot. What about the future of entertainment and gambling? And do you think we're going to see more virtual stuff? Because you want to keep making money, and it's hard to get even like some of the largest, most frequent travelers in the world like us are a little reluctant to fly, and it's not going to go away for a while. What's cooking on the next gen entertainment front? Because I know you've canceled a lot of your big events, and that is a huge part of a P&L item, I would guess, out there.
Yeah, 100%. I guess some areas we're looking at are first and foremost, on the gaming side, sports betting is becoming increasingly legalized. It's a real option and a growing behavior in a number of states, and more to come. And so we have a product there called Bet MGM, which has really taken off, and we're very optimistic about it. And Vegas is also a place where you come and you'll be able to watch the Raiders in the future. We were about to host the NFL draft. People come here for March Madness, so there's a lot of sports fan visitation, and so that's great. But then a daily digital relationship through sports betting is one area that we're going big on. I think in the pandemic, it's forced us to look at the convention business. Is there what I call a Peloton for meetings, where you could do some part virtual, but then also have a physical element of the meeting or the convention, which I think is something people will always want, because face-to-face is the best way to build relationships and get business done. So those are a couple of areas. I think before the pandemic, one of the key motivations I had coming into the company is essentially the opportunity to be creative, because if you think about it, the gaming industry is mature, it's rated. So while it's profitable, organic growth is not really going to come from there. It's really what we call non-gaming. And what that means is, in my view, experiences. So I've always thought of MGM Resorts as an experience economy company. And to me, an experience economy company is not, about a purchase or getting, a fancy watch or a purse. It's more about the activity, how you're spending a couple enjoyable days with, other people and experiencing new things that you might want to post on Instagram about or share or build a memory around.
Right.
And given the number of what I call SKUs, which are different things that you can do as part of our resort surface area, and creating a great itinerary for you, that's where we had, prior to my arrival, see a growing amount of visitation. Actually, our fastest category of visitation growth was coming from that non-gaming sort of high, 2-3 day premium experience. And so we want to kind of take that to the next level.
Yeah, girls' weekends, all that stuff. You have so many different personas of travelers out there. That's hey, speaking of sports, what about esports? It's booming right now during this shutdown. Obviously, it already was massive industry that Logitech, one of our previous guests, is a big part of. What any ideas there?
Yeah, esports is we're very, very active in it already. We have one property which actually is kind of a mecca for esports conventions and events. Mm-hmm. So it's called the Luxor, and we even kind of branded like an esports hotel. So that's interesting. I mean, I think you could potentially go further with it. Some innovation possibilities include, really thinking about the room and optimizing the room layout and design for gaming, because, a room designed for one person, a business traveler with their spouse to come, is very different than, 6 gamers spending 7 hours. You might design a room differently.
Yeah, they need a lot of not a lot of outlets, a lot of connectivity, a lot of Red Bull.
There you go. So yeah, different skin on top of a room could be an interesting concept.
What's going on in China? Macau is like one of your big resorts. I assume it's open and probably busy, right?
Yeah, so we see two things in China. First, in Macau, Macau is open. Macau controlled environment says you need to have a visa from the government to be able to visit. So if people can get that, they do visit. Business is coming back slowly. The other thing we're seeing is we operate non-gaming, where we have a partner that operates under our brands, non-gaming hotels in mainland China. So you can think about locations that might be more of a resort getaway, maybe warmer climates where people go, during holidays, for example. And those businesses, they've seen a resurgence because as the numbers have come down, they've seen occupancy, on good days in the 70s and 80s and even higher. So, that's a hopeful sign for us. So we're closely tracking it.
And just back to innovation and growth, and I know that's part of your core DNA. You have much broader responsibilities in this role, but it's my guess is that's your, where a lot of your passion comes from. How do you, when you look forward at the industry, how do you choose which things to work on? And I guess pre-2000, pre-2020 was probably a whole different, way to look at the business. Has that changed a lot? For instance, places like Illinois, where I am right now, legalizing gambling is a way to save the budget. And some of these states are trying to figure out everything from legalizing gambling to, substances and all types of things. And so there used to be a lot of scouting for, these third-tier properties, kind of like Vail Resorts has bought little ski resorts around. It's a feeder program to Vail. And do you still see that as a strategy for your industry?
There are multiple strategies for this industry. We have competitors who, do an excellent job of what you just described, which is kind of a geographical footprint where there are regional hubs, and it's a day trip. It's not an overnight stay. So those properties, they might have some hotel rooms, but not that much. That's been less so the strategy of this company, although that's an important ingredient, and we get a good amount of profitability for it. We've always been really more about kind of owning Las Vegas, if you will. And I mean that
Smart, yeah.
In a good way. And in terms of that, I mean, Las Vegas is one of those enduring things where it's very hard to compare to it. And so if you can keep modifying what Las Vegas means to the world, you have an ability to be relevant for a long, long time. And so that's sort of where my mindset was coming into the company is, if we are an experienced economy company, what are the next wave of experiences we need to be good at? Do we need to be better at health and wellness, for example? The answer is yes. So we modified some rooms for, we partnered actually with another company on a product called Stay Well. And these Stay Well rooms, they modify the lighting, there's air purifiers, and there's a number of other things where, it just makes for a better night's sleep, for example. So I think that opportunity to kind of put a different skin on Las Vegas, tap into the scale of the resorts, the people and the employees we have, the partners we can work with, for example, on food and entertainment, that is where I think the future opportunity is. Although obviously right now it's it's hit a pretty major monkey wrench.
Yeah. That's a new one. 2020, we'll call it the monkey wrench economy. It has thrown everything off, and it's good to see you, Atif, kind of, out there taking charge and trying to create the future. It's going to come back. It's just it's clear to me that you guys are going to be well positioned. Just it's been great having you on the program and reconnecting with you again. Hopefully next time we can do one of these, out there on one of your properties. Bellagio pool area would be nice. We'll do a cabana shoot maybe. Any words of wisdom for our listeners, both on the corporate side, hospitality side, startups, entrepreneurs, people still stuck at home?
Well, I think one thing we've learned is that we've had to get very close to the business, and I think that's a permanent change. So what I can say is that from the CEO onward, obviously since the crisis was clear that we were in a crisis, we began to corral the top tier of the company almost on a daily basis, right? Yep. And we continue to operate in a similar way. It may not be every single day, but I think we're in a permanent state of being very close to the details. And that's for the benefit of the company to have faster, higher quality decisions. And so we've kind of gotten agility without a need for a massive transformation program in some ways, which is kind of interesting. The agility is necessary for survival and for coming out the other side, with some robustness. And so I think that's going to be a very positive change because people feel the benefits of it. And I hope that is here to stay in the way we run companies. Agility to me, just to get into a little bit, is about the speed of learning. So it's not, okay, something changed in the world, now the plan is totally different. That's just chaos. But it's really about saying, okay, do we know more today than we did yesterday about anything? Customer needs, safety, business model. And I think the more we can improve our rate of learning, ask the right questions, then the fact that we're going to be able to respond to change and make better decisions as leaders.
Yeah, good advice. I don't see it slipping back. I mean, many crises, companies slip back into their normal. I think it's been a big enough shock to the system where it's systemic, it's global. It's like people know they've got to change, and the smart companies are going to create new businesses out of it, not just survive. Thanks for joining us. You've been listening to Atif, and he is the president at MGM, and it's good to see you again.
Dean, it's a pleasure, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, hopefully out there. Cheers.
Cheers.